The religious have a lot of problems, we know that, but this is one of the biggest, and it's the complete failure to take responsibility for all the places that they are demonstrably wrong. Because that might hurt their precious widow fee-fees, and they sure can't have that, can they? Because this is never about truth. It's always about childish fantasy, and today, we're going to look at one of the biggest religious children around. Stay tuned. Today, we're doing a Ken Ham video where he spends the entire time trying to take credit for things that he had nothing at all to do with and pointing fingers at everyone else because he and his religion, well, they just can't be wrong, can they? Of course not. Just ask him. Yet this is the problem that we see so often from the religious. They are supremely confident in their beliefs, but their beliefs are not rationally defensible in any way, shape, or form. They just really like the idea, but liking the idea doesn't make any of it true, and this is why they fail so often. So let's go watch the excuse train to oblivion coming right out of Ken Ham's mouth. Won't that be fun?
Why is the Christian worldview collapsing in America?
Because it's stupid, it's laughably false, evidentially unsupportable, and people aren't so dumb as to fall for it anymore. Or is that not the answer that you're looking for? When I saw this video, I just knew I had to do it. I would have, even if I hadn't been dabbling in Ken Ham over the last couple of months, because I knew this would be full of irrational excuses, lame make-believe nonsense, and Ken's standard, I'm right because I'm right bullshit. I mean, what else does he have? I'm honestly not taking this at all seriously, because really, how seriously can you take Ken Ham? So go ahead, Ken, make a whole bunch of excuses and don't include any actual demonstrable truth, because it's really all you know how to do.
Well, if we go back in time, it wasn't that many generations ago that a very Christianized worldview, I say Christianized, not truly Christian, but Christianized worldview, and by that I mean the Judeo-Christian ethic based on the Bible, permeated America, permeated really the Western world.
Because Christianity had unearned social and political power that it lacks today. I know Ken won't like that. He certainly won't admit to it, but it remains true. There was a time when Christianity in the Western world pretty much ran the government. They gave all kinds of undeserved benefits to religion and to religious people. Some states passed laws excluding atheists from holding government offices. Those have all been struck down by the Supreme Court, of course, but not a single one of them, at least I don't think so, has ever been removed from the Constitution of the states that enacted them. In a lot of places, it was effectively illegal to be an atheist, or at the very least, it was a serious pain in the ass if you were. You could lose your job, you could get thrown out of your house, people could refuse to do business with you, all because you didn't believe in the same imaginary friend that they did. And that went for people who had unpopular religions too. Christians could and did make their lives a living hell. So while Ken is trying to play this off as a good thing, it was horrible for everyone but the very specific religious sect in power, and even the minority Christian sects, they got abused too because Christianity tends to turn people into assholes. I can't imagine why Ken would want to get back to that again, but, you know, he's expecting to be the one in power because Ken Ham is just a fucking prick. He's just assuming that he'd be the one in control. And that's probably not a good assumption.
And so, at that time, even those who are not Christian would have believed that marriage is a man and a woman.
Not necessarily. Not that it would have mattered because the government was under de facto Christian control. Nobody could get married to anyone except the opposite sex. It wasn't legal, and in fact, in most places, it was actually illegal. You could go to jail if you were gay. You could be arrested and persecuted if anyone even suspected that you were gay. And even if the law never got involved, gay people could get beaten or killed, and the highly religious authorities just looked the other way because they didn't want to acknowledge that any of this stuff was going on. Ken probably thinks that's a utopia. Ken is an asshole. Big surprise there.
That there are only two genders, male and female, and also that abortion would be killing a human being.
Which nobody denies. Obviously, it's human. It's got the right chromosomes. It's got everything that qualifies it to be a human. So what? It's still not a legally protected human being. Ken is a dipshit. Now, I don't do politics around here, no matter how many times people try to make me do so, but I don't because it really doesn't matter. That's something I'll talk about elsewhere, but YouTube tends to frown on some political views, and making yourself a target for the censorship is probably not a good idea, so I just don't do it. Besides, I noticed that the political videos tended to get a lot fewer views than the religious videos, and so, hey, even though I hate the stupid algorithm, I still want my videos to get watched, so I don't do politics. So if you want to ask me political questions, yeah, there's other places you can do that, but it's not here. I don't mind if you ask, but at least respect the boundaries.
And of course, there was a respect for the Bible, and so therefore the Bible's morality sort of permeated people's thinking. And that fits with, the conscience that God has given us, a law that's written on our hearts as well.
It's still all bullshit. Now, I'm sure he's going to cry because, well, we don't get our way anymore. But I couldn't care less. Nobody should respect the Bible because the Bible hasn't earned any respect. In fact, I'd argue that Christianity in this case, since that's what we're talking about here, that doesn't deserve any respect either. And we could say the same thing about Islam and Hinduism, etc., but that's not the point of this specific video, and we try to stay on topic. If you want me to talk about how crappy Islam or Hinduism or any other religion is, by all means, find me a video to go after, and I'd be more than happy to do so. But Christianity has earned all of the hatred that it's gotten because Christians, some Christians, people specifically like Ken, evangelicals and fundamentalists and the like, they have made such complete asses of themselves that people have started hating them for cause. Plus, with the increase in education and at least some critical thinking going on, not nearly enough sadly, that it was only a matter of time until the house of cards that is Christianity started to fall. And it couldn't have happened to a more well-deserving cult.
But what's happened over time in our Western world is that we have found that the majority of our children, 85% of kids from church homes, for instance, have gone through a secular education system. A secular is not neutral.
Nothing is neutral. Nothing at all. He's just complaining that he can't brainwash kids like was once the case. Schools aren't teaching there is no God, no matter what people like Ken think. But secular is the default here. If you never introduce the idea of gods to kids, then they will never believe in gods. You have to be programmed to believe, and Ken wishes he could program everyone's kids. Too bad. Yet even for kids that are indoctrinated into religion, the majority of them just walk away. By the time they graduate from high school, 70% of kids stop believing in gods. Now, some of them do return, I'll be fair, but most kids, even the ones that go to religious schools or that are homeschooled in a religious setting, they mostly do leave, despite their parents' best attempts to force them to remain. Why? Because unless you lock these kids in a basement with only bread and a Bible, reality says that all of this is bullshit. Because it is.
No such thing as neutrality. You're either for Christ or against. You either build your house on the rock or you build your house on the sand. So secular really means anti-God. They're going through this anti-God education system.
That's bullshit, though. This is why Ken looks like such a lunatic. Because he is. You're either with us or you're against us. Yet, not so much. But Ken is just making a complete fool of himself because he doesn't understand that if he wants to keep kids Christian, or make them Christian in the first place, if he can't brainwash them, then he has to have more than fifis and faith, and he simply doesn't have anything else. You need evidence for this kind of stuff, and the religious have none. You need to be able to make a case beyond my book says a thing, and they can't. It might have worked in the past when everyone was forcibly brainwashed and society kept everyone in the fold by punishing anyone who strayed. That is not the world that we live in today, and hopefully it'll never go back to that again, because that is downright evil. Not that I suspect Ken would ever agree.
That is throwing God out, that is really taught against the Bible increasingly, or throwing the Bible out altogether, and has taught generations that they arose by natural processes, naturalism, which is atheism, in other words, the evolutionary worldview.
You are such an idiot, Ken. You do know that the overwhelming majority of Christians accept evolution as the best supported position one can have on the matter, right? Creationism is a ludicrously minority view, even among Christians. This is why Ken is such a ludicrous joke, because his focus is just so absurdly narrow that he only sees people exactly like him as Christian. Well, unless he needs to embrace the rest for social or political power. Then it's, look at all the Christians out there. He's fine with there being more than 45,000 distinct sects of Christianity, so long as only his sect is in charge. Because only his sect is right. This guy is a complete dipshit.
And so they're just animals. And so who determines right and wrong? Well, you do. So increasingly what happened was we have generations coming through an education system, and also impacted by the media and other factors as well, such as most churches not teaching a true biblical worldview, beginning with Genesis 1 to 11.
This whole video is just Ken making excuses, isn't it? Granted, it's not just Ken, it's all of them. I bet I could find a bunch of videos out there saying essentially the same thing about, here's why our religion is failing, but it's got nothing at all to do with our religion. It's all your fault. Yet the actual problem is Christianity. Not just Christianity, of course, but all religions. It's not just Christianity that's dying a well-deserved death. According to Pew, about 100,000 people in the United States leave Islam every single year. Islam is tiny compared to Christianity. Judaism is losing members in the US, and I tried to look up Hinduism, but since virtually all Hindus are immigrants, those are some kind of hard figures to get. If you have better figures, let me know down in the comments, but couldn't find them myself. There aren't really people converting to Hinduism that I could find. All religions are affected because all religions have the same problems. They're all just nonsense.
And we have then generations arising who have the foundation of man's word, not God's word. Therefore, man determines right and wrong, good and bad. Out of that comes the secular worldview.
This really is just Ken making excuses and pointing fingers at everything but his own faith, isn't it? Well, it can't be us. Well, of course it can. But Ken isn't honest. Ken doesn't have an honest religious bone in his body. Ken is just another liar for the Lord, making videos only to keep the people already on his side on the straight and narrow and giving money to him and his stupid Ark Park. And you have to remember that the thing hardly makes any money at all. Annual revenue in 2023 was $690,000. It employs 50 people, and if every cent of that $690,000 went to just salaries, his employees would be making under $14,000 a year each. So you're not healthy, dude. You're just making a complete fucking fool of yourself.
And so we've seen this change happening, and out of the secular worldview, what happens is they become more consistent. And so if they have gotten to the stage of, believing there's no God, the Bible's not true, then right and wrong is whatever you want to make it to be. It's sort of like the book of Judges. When they had no king to tell them what to do, they all did what was right according to their own eyes.
Nobody cares about your stupid book. This is basically Ken wanting everyone to be a slave to his imaginary friend. In fact, you'll find apologists saying exactly that. Well, if you're not God's slave, then whose slave will you be? Yeah, fuck you. I'm not anyone's slave. And if you compare the most religious countries to the least religious are doing far better by every measurable metric than the religious are. You just have to go back to the happiness index, which we've talked about many times here, and probably don't have to do it again because I don't want to bore people. But if you want happy, healthy, well-adjusted people, people who are eating healthy foods, people who are not sick and dying, then getting rid of religion is the first thing you have to do. Of course, from Ken's perspective, he's just looking for a means of control, and religion has provided that to the religious for many, many centuries in the past. He just wants to get that power back, and screw you, Ken. Screw you up a tree with a pitchfork. The last thing anyone wants, anyone with a brain at least, is to give religion that unearned control back. We've seen what you do with it, and it's not anything good.
You would expect to see increasingly moral relativism permeate the culture, and that's what we see.
Because that's reality. This is the problem with the religious, and I suppose it isn't all them, because there are still moral realists that aren't religious, although I don't think any of them can remotely justify it. I've seen people try, and they've failed every single time. But that's really the thing, though. I expect people to be able to rationally justify their beliefs and provide evidence that any of it is true. All of them have to do that, and the religious, and I know it's not just them, but they can never do it, can they? And they don't even try. They just make bald-ass assertions and then say, well, we're right. But that doesn't mean you're right. It's why they can't answer my "how do you know that" question, and they don't care. How do they know any of this stuff that they claim to know? Well, I have faith. But faith doesn't mean anything. I asked about knowledge. I asked about evidence. How do you know that? But I have faith. It's like talking to idiots, which, of course, that's exactly what I'm doing, right?
Whereas once the Judeo-Christian ethic was more dominant in the American culture, now moral relativism from the secular worldview is the dominant worldview.
And isn't that a good thing? I mean, I suppose it isn't always really, but certainly I'd rather have moral relativism, which is at least real, over Christianity, which is anything but. Ken wouldn't agree, of course, because he couldn't care less about reality, but, fuck Ken Ham. And I think, just as an aside, that it's funny watching the religious turning on each other, because that's what they usually do. In the sidebar, as I'm writing this, there's another Ken Ham video where he says you can't trust William Lane Craig anymore. Granted, I don't think you ever could, but just watching these idiots fragment as their silly beliefs begin to disintegrate, I think that's really entertaining to watch. How about you? It always strikes me as jealousy. Well, don't follow that guy around and give him your money. Give it to me.
And that's why we see this clash, and those who hold to moral relativism look on those who are Christians as, well, they are intolerant. They are the ones that give hate speech. They are the ones who are misogynist or homophobes or whatever it is. And yet it's the secularists who really are the intolerant people, because they don't want Christians standing on God's word and therefore insisting on Christian absolutes. They want everything but Christian absolutes. So you see that clash that we see in our culture.
I just let that run on because he didn't take a breath the whole time. There was really nowhere for me to jump in. So sorry for the extended bout of stupidity. Not a whole lot I can do. He's still just making excuses though, isn't he? Well, it's not us, it's them. No, it's you. It's always you. It's always been you. The reason Christianity is dying is people like Ken Ham, people like the aforementioned William Lane Craig, people like Frank Turek and Kenneth Copeland and the McDowell idiots. Granted, outside of people who watch the religiously deluded for fun, these people are largely unknown, but their influence on religious culture, especially fundamentalist and evangelical culture, it's very obvious. It's the blind stupidity that religion imposes on people, and that's driving it out of business. Shysters like Ken, who don't understand just how bad their stupidity makes their religion look, those are the people who are really responsible. Religion, whether anyone likes it or not, is a product, just like anything else. And if you can't convince people to buy your product, then your product goes the way of the dodo, which is exactly what we're seeing right now. People like Ken, they aren't bright enough to understand that they need to rebrand to appeal to an existing audience. The people they're appealing to, they're old and mostly dead, rotting in the pews. So if they want to continue, they have to adapt, and people like Ken are just too stubborn and stupid to ever consent to that. People who once embraced Christianity, they're either leaving religion entirely, which is fantastic, or they're just going to remain fossils in the pews until the whole thing falls down around their ears. They have had an opportunity to rework how people see their products, and they've just refused. So just like the big retail giants like Sears and JCPenney and Circuit City, they've just cratered into the ground and gone out of business because they refuse to acknowledge the new reality that they actually live in. And this new reality does not include religion. It just doesn't.
But that's really what's happened. And a big part of the problem is the church, because churches should have been standing on God's word, raising up generations to know what they believe and know why they believe what they do, to have a Christian worldview. But instead, in many ways, many of the church leaders endorse the secular education system, saying you can believe what you're taught at school, you can believe in evolution millions of years. Don't worry about that. Just trust in Jesus, Johnny. But little Johnny, over time, starts to see that, well, if the history in the Bible in Genesis is not true, how can the rest be true? And over time, there becomes this doubt that you can believe any of the Bible. And we've seen an incredible exodus from the church.
Now, tell me if you've noticed this too, because I certainly have. But when people, in this case, the religious, but of course that's not always the case, but when people get really, really nervous, they tend to talk very fast. And that's exactly what Ken is doing right now. I figure he knows this is all bullshit, but he's committed to riding the train down into the bottom of the gorge, and he's trying to grab the existing believers as hard as he can, lest they and their money slip away. He can't admit that his church has done anything wrong. He'll point at anyone else, even other Christian churches, but it can't be his church that's the problem. Not his way, not his beliefs. He can't possibly be wrong. He's too busy standing on the deck of the Titanic while it's tilting downwards, shouting,
"Please, Pittsburgh! Nothing to see here, please!"
What else can he do? He's too old to go out and get a real job, and I don't think he has any worthwhile skills other than conning people, so he has to keep clinging to the past, a past that never really existed, because in reality, he's stuck. He has to keep writing books and making videos for the very few people that still give him money, because that's what it's all about. If he can just hold on until he drops dead, and seriously, it can't be that much longer until then, this guy is 72, then he can consider his entire misbegotten life a success. And it's really too bad for him that he's wrong.
It's interesting that the exodus from the church, if you go back to the 1700s, there was 75-80% of the population in America went to church.
But see, that's the problem. That's a world that never was ever real. If you go back and you look at actual history, we find that in 1850, for instance, only about 35% of Americans were church members, and the majority of Americans remained outside churches. They might have been Christians, but they weren't churchgoers. It wasn't until the 1930s at least that church attendance was in the majority, where it stayed until about 2000 at about 70%, something like that, and it's been falling ever since. It was 47% in 2020, and it's below that today. If you look at Church Track, which is a religious tracking organization, only 20% of Americans attend church every single week. I was once in that 20%, although it was higher when I was doing it. According to Gallup, there are 41% of Americans that are church members in 2024. That's monthly attendance, not weekly, monthly. I'm not really impressed with that, are you?
Whereas now, in the 21st century, we're finding that we're down to less than 9% of Generation Z. It's interesting, the catastrophic generational loss from the church has gone actually hand in hand with the increasing secularization of the culture.
Advanced education has done away with the need for religious belief in a lot of people. Mostly, religious belief relies on ignorance, and the less ignorant you are, especially in the physical sciences, the less likely you are to believe in any gods. That's why most top scientists are atheists. Religion tends to pander to the uneducated and the painfully ignorant, which I think we can see by just how many dumb people are making religious videos on YouTube. Seriously, we do a wide range of religious videos here. I do that way on purpose. How many people in the videos that we do would you say that have the slightest clue about anything at all? Let me know what you think down in the comments, because I don't think many of them really know anything. They don't know anything about their religion. They don't know anything about reality. They just want to believe. Their beliefs are based on their emotions, not remotely any evidence. And that's why none of them fare remotely well, and they shouldn't. Ken Ham is not a role model. He's a laughingstock. Deal with it.
Because we've lost those generations from the church, they become very secularized. We let them be secularized. So now we find we have a very anti-God culture.
It's not like you had a choice. I find this to be very common too. A lot of them are like, well, we let them go. No, you couldn't have stopped them if you tried. Granted, that's why a lot of these people are really looking for the good old days where they could just lock their kids in the basement and beat them until they profess belief in Jesus, because that's what they're really after. That's what they wish they could get away with today. You don't have that kind of control that you wish you did, and that's never coming back. People have their own minds. You have to convince them, and you're not remotely trying. That's the problem. Idiots like Ken think God is self-evident, and he's just wrong. God is your imaginary friend because you're not bright enough to know any better. That's a you problem. What else is new? After that, he goes into self-promotion, so we're just going to skip over all that stuff. We're not giving him any money that he hasn't earned, and he hasn't earned anything. So anyway, what did you think? Are you as utterly unimpressed with Ken Ham as I am? Let me know down in the comments. Ken is a dinosaur. I know he doesn't much like dinosaurs, especially the reality of them, but so what? He's what has caused religion to die, and now he's just riding the bomb all the way down. Then he has the gall to point fingers and blame everyone else. And I'm sorry, Ken, the world has grown up and given up on your stupid fantasies. Maybe you ought to do the same thing. Granted, we know he'll never do it because he's too far into the scam to give it up, and let's be honest, he's really not that bright, so it's not like he can think his way out of his religion because thinking is scary. Just ask them if they're fundamentalist or evangelical religious, why they believe. And it's always faith, it's always fifis, it's never, well, I came to this conclusion rationally, because they never do. They should just get herded into asylums and have the doors slammed behind them, because these people are actually dangerous to society. Maybe they can get the help they really need. I don't know. But at the very least, maybe it might help society to be rid of them, because these people are real idiots. It's getting harder and harder to deny that, isn't it? So let's do something about them and try to get them the help they need, because otherwise they wind up looking like Ken Ham.